The Apache Hearttaker, Tombstone's Noon Curse before the OK Corral, Arizona, 1881. The sun burned down mercilessly over Tombstone, a small town in southeastern Arizona. The town was alive with the noise of horse hooves clattering on wooden streets, doors creaking open to saloons, and miners, merchants, and travelers hustling about their business. Tombstone had been built almost overnight after silver was discovered nearby, and people from all walks of life flocked there, hoping to make their fortunes. The air smelled faintly of dust, sweat, and the rich metallic scent of silver, and the excitement of opportunity mixed with a quiet tension that seemed to hang over the town like a cloud. It was a town on the edge, caught between civilization and the wild frontier. Beyond the wooden fences and busy streets lay open desert and jagged mountains, home to the Apache people whose knowledge of the land made them unmatched in tracking and survival. For the people of Tombstone, life was a constant balance between ambition and danger. Rumors of conflicts, land disputes, and theft circulated constantly. Travelers and townsfolk had to be careful with whom they trusted, because in a place where gold and silver could change a person's life overnight, greed often overcame honesty. Into this bustling town arrived a man named John McLean, known in whispers and half-truths as the Apache Hearttaker. He was a man shaped by the harsh realities of frontier life. Standing tall with broad shoulders and a sharp gaze, he moved through the dusty streets with a quiet confidence. John had spent many years as a scout, navigating the dangerous lands near Apache territory and learning the skills needed to survive in a place where the line between life and death could be measured in moments. His reputation preceded him. Some admired his bravery and skill, while others feared his presence, unsure whether he would bring protection or trouble. John's arrival was subtle but noticeable. He rented a small room above a bakery and spent his mornings watching the streets, observing the miners and merchants, the gamblers and lawmen. He was not a man of many words, but when he spoke, people listened. His knowledge of the land, his understanding of the Apache people, and his experiences in the frontier made him a person of interest to anyone who wanted to understand or survive in Tombstone. Though he tried to stay quiet, the townspeople could not help but notice him, and stories about his past began to spread. The town itself was growing rapidly, and with growth came both opportunity and tension. The silver mines brought money and excitement, but also rivalries and disputes over claims. Merchants set up shops, saloons opened, and the streets were filled with the lively sounds of people trying to make their way in the new and unpredictable world. Among the notable residents were the Earp brothers, who had become familiar figures in town due to their efforts to maintain some sense of order. Doc Holliday, a gambler and doctor with a sharp mind, moved in the same circles, offering both help and challenge to those around him. The townspeople respected these figures, but even they were careful to understand the delicate balance of power and influence in Tombstone. John McLean quickly found himself drawn into the rhythm of the town. He was not interested in silver or gambling. Instead, he observed, listened, and learned. He noticed the tension between ranchers and miners, the whispered arguments about land and water rights, and the occasional disputes that could easily escalate if left unchecked. His experience as a scout and tracker had taught him the value of patience and observation. He understood that in a place like Tombstone, survival often depended more on knowing the people around you than on being skilled with weapons. Despite the outward excitement and opportunity, there were darker currents beneath the surface. Some townsfolk spoke of old legends and superstitions, stories of curses and spirits tied to the land, and of past conflicts with Apache bands that had ended in sudden violence. These stories were often told in hushed voices, sometimes over a glass of whiskey in a dimly lit saloon or around a campfire at the edge of town. While some dismissed these tales as old superstitions, others listened carefully, recognizing that in the frontier, danger could come from unexpected places. John himself knew better than most. His experiences had taught him that every story, no matter how strange it seemed, often held a grain of truth. One morning, as the town came alive with the sound of merchants opening their shops and horses being led to the stables, John walked through the central street, taking note of the faces around him. There was a miner wiping sweat from his brow, a shopkeeper arranging goods, and a group of children playing with a hoop and stick. For a moment, Tombstone seemed almost peaceful, a town brimming with life and promise. Yet John could feel the undercurrent of tension, an invisible thread connecting the people, the land, and the past. He sensed that change was coming, and he would soon be part of events that would leave a lasting mark on the town's history. The townsfolk were curious about John. They whispered about the Apache heart-taker, a man who had survived battles and carried knowledge of both the settlers and Apache ways. Some wanted his help in navigating the tricky terrain of local disputes, while others kept their distance, unsure of his intentions. John was careful in whom he trusted. He knew that alliances were fragile in Tombstone, and that even a momentary mistake could have lasting consequences. His life on the frontier had taught him that caution was a strength, not a weakness. As days turned into weeks, John became a quiet observer of Tombstone's complex life. He would sometimes sit at the edge of town, watching the mountains and deserts stretch endlessly, reflecting on the choices that had brought him here. He thought about the people he had met, the conflicts he had avoided, and the lessons he had learned. Every interaction in town, from a simple conversation with a shopkeeper to a tense glance across a saloon, added another layer of understanding to the delicate balance of life in Tombstone. Though he appeared calm and collected, John carried the weight of his past with him. Memories of long journeys, encounters with Apache bands, and the constant challenge of surviving in the wild frontier shaped the way he moved and spoke. He was aware that his presence in Tombstone was not just a personal journey, but also a chapter in a larger story of the American West, a story of opportunity, danger, culture, and the fragile line between peace and chaos. By the end of the first summer, John had become more than just a newcomer. He was a figure whose reputation and skills were beginning to influence the town, even if people did not fully understand how. He remained mostly to himself, careful to observe and assess, but there was a quiet respect forming around him. The people of Tombstone knew he was capable, wise, and experienced, and they began to sense that he might play a key role in the events that were quietly approaching, events that would test the town, its residents, and the legends surrounding it. The summer of 1881 was a time of promise, tension, and anticipation in Tombstone. For John McLean, the Apache heart-taker, it was a time of adjustment and observation, a time to understand the people and the land he had entered. The town buzzed with life and ambition, yet beneath the lively surface, change was stirring. Soon, the quiet days and cautious observations would give way to challenges, confrontations, and choices that would define not only John's story, but also the history of Tombstone itself. As the summer of 1881 moved on in Tombstone, the town seemed busier and more restless with each passing day. Merchants opened new shops, miners rushed to stake claims, and travelers brought news from far-off towns. Yet, beneath the surface of daily life, tensions quietly simmered. Conflicts over land and water, disagreements between miners and ranchers, and whispers of danger from the surrounding desert all created an undercurrent of unease. People in Tombstone knew that life in the town could be exciting, but it could also change in an instant. John McLean, the man the townsfolk called the Apache heart-taker, had begun to settle into a careful routine. He walked the streets at dawn, noting who came and went, listening to conversations, and observing how people interacted. He had learned quickly that the town was a place of contradictions. Friendly smiles could hide resentment, and a cheerful conversation could turn into an argument in moments. John's eyes missed nothing. His experience as a scout and traveler had taught him that survival often depended on understanding the people around you more than relying on any other skill. Despite his efforts to remain an observer, John could not ignore the stories that reached him. Stagecoaches had been attacked near the town's outskirts, and livestock had disappeared from local ranches. Some people whispered that Apache bands were responsible, while others thought local thieves were taking advantage of the chaos. Rumors spread quickly, as they always did in a small town where everyone was connected. Even those who had never left Tombstone seemed to know the latest news, and the sense of unease grew like smoke across the streets. John listened to these stories carefully, knowing that each rumor might contain a hint of truth. His instincts told him that something significant was about to happen. The warnings he quietly passed to the Earp brothers and other town leaders were met with polite nods, but many dismissed his advice as the cautious words of a man who had seen too much in the wilderness. Still, John persisted. He had learned that preparation and awareness often made the difference between safety and danger. While the town's adults were preoccupied with rumors and planning, children continued to play in the streets, seemingly unaware of the tension surrounding them. They ran with hoops and sticks, chased each other around corners, and laughed loudly, providing a reminder that life, even in a frontier town, had moments of innocence. John sometimes paused to watch them, reflecting on his own childhood and feeling a rare sense of calm amidst the uncertainty of Tombstone. But the peaceful moments were fleeting. One afternoon, John observed a heated argument near the saloon. Two ranchers were disputing over water rights, their voices growing louder until a small crowd gathered. John stayed back, listening and watching carefully. He had seen similar disputes turn dangerous in other towns, and he knew that any spark could ignite into something larger if no one intervened. His presence alone seemed to calm the situation slightly, though the tension remained. The town needed voices like his, careful, measured, and aware of the consequences of every action. Meanwhile, the rumors of a curse began to spread more actively. Some townsfolk claimed that an old legend predicted that bloodshed would come to Tombstone at high noon. While many dismissed it as superstition, others took it seriously, especially those who had experienced the unpredictability of frontier life. The story of a curse added a strange weight to the town's growing tension. Every shadow in the streets, every sudden noise, seemed to remind people of the danger that might be lurking nearby. John did not believe in curses, but he respected the power of belief. In a town like Tombstone, fear and expectation could shape events as strongly as any skill or plan. John began to spend more time on the edges of town, near the desert and mountains. He knew that understanding the land surrounding Tombstone was just as important as knowing the people. From these vantage points, he could see trails used by travelers, spots where stagecoaches might be vulnerable, and areas where livestock could be lost. He made careful mental notes, connecting what he saw with the stories he heard from townsfolk. Each observation helped him build a clearer picture of the challenges Tombstone faced. At the same time, John was learning about the town's leaders and influencers. The Earp brothers, respected and cautious, tried to maintain order but faced challenges from both outlaws and everyday disputes. Doc Holliday, with his sharp mind and calm confidence, often acted as a mediator in tense situations. John understood that the success and safety of Tombstone depended not only on courage, but on alliances, intelligence, and strategic thinking. By aligning himself carefully with people he could trust, John quietly strengthened the town's ability to respond to danger. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains and cast long shadows across the streets, John observed a small group of men gathered near the edge of town. They spoke in low voices, glancing around as if expecting someone to appear. While he could not hear all their words, John noticed patterns in their behavior, movements, gestures, and the tension in their postures that suggested something significant was being planned. He made a note of it, planning to inform the Earp brothers in a careful, discreet way. Knowledge was power, and the ability to act on it wisely could prevent serious trouble. As the days passed, John became a figure of quiet influence in Tombstone. People still whispered about his past and his unusual skills, but they also began to rely on his judgment. Whether it was a dispute between neighbors, a missing horse, or a rumor of danger in the desert, John's advice and observations carried weight. The town, vibrant and restless, was slowly coming to see him as someone who could navigate both the social and environmental challenges of life on the frontier. Through all this, John never lost sight of the importance of understanding culture and perspective. He had spent years among the Apache people, learning their ways, understanding their respect for the land, and observing the careful balance of community and survival. He knew that missteps often came from ignorance or misunderstanding. By appreciating the complexity of both the settlers and Apache worlds, John was able to act with a level of wisdom that others in the town did not always possess. By the end of the summer, tension in Tombstone had grown in a way that no one could ignore. The combination of disputes, rumors, and the ever-present threat of danger created a town on edge. John McLean, while still an observer in many ways, had become an important part of the town's invisible safety network. His presence, his knowledge, and his awareness allowed him to guide others subtly, helping Tombstone prepare for events that none of its residents could yet fully predict. The days grew hotter and the town continued its restless rhythm. Horses clattered along dusty streets, merchants called out to customers, children played in the sun, and travelers arrived with news from distant towns. Yet under the surface of everyday life, the quiet tension remained, as if the town itself were holding its breath. John McLean understood that the true test of Tombstone's resilience had not yet arrived. There would come a day when his skills, patience, and careful observation would be needed more than ever, and the choices made in these quiet, tense days would shape the future of the town and the stories told about it for generations. As the summer of 1881 stretched on in Tombstone, the town became a place where every moment felt like the calm before a storm. The sun still burned hot over the streets, and the dust from the horses' hooves and wagons created a haze that clung to the buildings. Merchants and miners went about their business, but beneath the surface there was a growing sense that something significant was about to happen. Even casual observers could sense the tension. Small disputes, whispered warnings, and strange coincidences all contributed to a feeling that the town's rhythm was changing. John McLean, the man called the Apache heart-taker, noticed it more than anyone else. He walked the streets with quiet attention, observing not only the people, but also the subtle shifts in behavior. Ranchers spoke in hushed tones about missing livestock, stagecoach drivers whispered of bandits near the trails, and even children seemed more cautious as they played. John knew that these small signs often preceded larger events. He had lived through such moments in other towns and territories where minor disturbances hinted at challenges that would soon grow. One morning, John followed a narrow trail along the edge of the desert outside Tombstone. He had heard that a small group of men had been seen moving near the hills, and his instincts told him it was worth investigating. From a safe distance, he observed their movements. They carried supplies and spoke quietly, clearly aware that someone might be watching. John did not confront them. Instead, he memorized their location, the path they were taking, and the way they reacted to the land around them. This careful observation was a skill he had developed over many years as a scout, and he knew it could prevent trouble before it started. Back in town, John shared what he had learned with the Earp brothers. Wyatt, Virgil, and Morgan listened carefully, recognizing that John's knowledge of the surrounding terrain and the people moving through it could help them maintain order. Doc Holliday also took note of John's observations. Although some in town were skeptical of the warnings, the Earps trusted his judgment. They knew that life in Tombstone required careful attention and foresight. Ignoring small signs often led to larger problems, and John's experience gave them an advantage they could not afford to ignore. Meanwhile, rumors about the high noon curse grew louder. People began speaking more openly about the legend, claiming that some events in town seemed to confirm it. A stagecoach had been delayed, a horse went missing, and a minor disagreement between ranchers escalated quickly before being quietly resolved. Some townspeople laughed at the idea of a curse, while others looked at the sun and wondered if the stories were true. John, of course, did not believe in supernatural forces, but he understood the power of belief. Fear, expectation, and superstition could influence behavior as strongly as any law or skill. In a town as unpredictable as Tombstone, understanding people's beliefs could be just as important as understanding the land. One afternoon, as the heat pressed down on the town, John noticed something unusual near the outskirts. A group of men appeared to be following the trails he had watched days before. They moved with purpose, scanning the horizon as if looking for something specific. John's instincts told him that a confrontation was likely, not because the men intended harm, but because the situation was tense and missteps could escalate quickly. He quickly made his way to the Earps to provide another update, urging caution and careful preparation. The town's leaders responded quietly but decisively. They began to ensure that local citizens were aware of the dangers without causing panic. Ranchers were advised to watch their herds more closely, stagecoach operators were reminded to travel in groups, and the Earps increased their patrols along critical routes. John also took time to speak with individuals, sharing practical advice on how to stay safe in the surrounding desert and hills. His guidance was measured, calm, and precise, reinforcing the town's sense of preparedness without creating fear. Over the next few days, tension in Tombstone continued to rise. People began noticing small details they had previously ignored. A door left slightly open, a stranger lingering at the edge of town, or unusual tracks in the dust. Children played more cautiously, and adults spoke in quieter tones. John observed all of this with a careful eye. He knew that in frontier towns, small details often pointed to larger events, and he made mental notes of patterns, behaviors, and anomalies. Then, one evening, John spotted a figure moving along the hills just outside town. The man paused, looked back toward Tombstone, and then continued on a narrow trail. Something about his movement struck John as deliberate, confident, and potentially dangerous. He followed the trail at a safe distance, careful to remain unseen, and observed that the man was meeting with a small group. They spoke quietly, exchanged items, and then went their separate ways. John returned to town with a clearer understanding of what might unfold in the days ahead. Back in the heart of Tombstone, life continued its unpredictable rhythm. The saloons were crowded with miners, merchants, and travelers, all talking, laughing, and sometimes arguing. The sun blazed over the streets, and the smell of dust, food, and horses filled the air. Yet the town seemed to hold its breath, as if everyone sensed that a turning point was approaching. Even the most carefree residents could not ignore the sense of anticipation building around them. John began to take steps to prepare the town for what he sensed was coming. He shared observations, suggested routes for safety, and advised on potential vulnerabilities. He also spent time helping the Earps understand the psychology of people in tense situations, explaining how fear, excitement, and rumor could influence behavior. His insights were subtle but important, helping the town's leaders maintain control and calm in a place where both were often in short supply. Despite the tension, John also found moments to appreciate the town and its people. He observed families gathering on porches in the evening, children chasing each other across dusty streets, and merchants sharing stories about life in Tombstone. These small moments reminded him why he had chosen to stay, and why he continued to invest his energy in the town's safety. Tombstone was more than a place of rumors and tension. It was a community with hopes, challenges, and resilience. Then came the moment that would mark the turning point of the summer. One morning, John noticed unusual activity near the main trail leading into town. A group of men appeared to be moving in a way that suggested preparation rather than casual travel. They paused, studied the town from a distance, and seemed to be coordinating their movements. John quickly informed the Earps, emphasizing the need for careful monitoring without creating alarm. The situation required patience, observation, and the right timing. The day of the approaching confrontation was bright and clear, with the sun climbing steadily in the sky. The town's residents went about their routines, mostly unaware of the careful planning happening on the edges of their community. John and the Earps, however, understood the significance of the moment. The tension that had been building for weeks, combined with the rumors, the movements of the outsiders, and the fragile balance of life in Tombstone, all pointed to an event that could change the town forever. By the time the sun reached its highest point, John had positioned himself strategically to observe without being seen. He was prepared to act if necessary, but also understood that timing, calm, and awareness were crucial. He watched as the group of men approached, noting their behavior, their coordination, and the way they moved through the landscape. Each detail added to his understanding of what might happen next. As noon approached, the town seemed to pause. People felt the weight of the summer sun, but some also sensed the invisible tension hanging in the air. John's careful preparation, observation, and knowledge of the land and people had positioned him to respond effectively to whatever might unfold. He knew that the moments ahead would test the town's leaders, the citizens, and himself in ways that were both subtle and significant. John understood that the upcoming event was not only a challenge of skill and observation, but also of character. How the town responded, how he responded, and how the Earps and other leaders managed the tension would leave a mark on the history of Tombstone. It was a turning point, the moment when preparation, awareness, and wisdom would be tested against the unknown. The day had arrived. The sun rose high over Tombstone, casting long golden rays across the dusty streets. The air was dry and still, carrying the faint scent of horses, leather, and silver dust from the nearby mines. Though the town appeared ordinary at first glance, a subtle tension had settled over every building, every street corner, and every person. Residents went about their routines, but even the children's laughter seemed a little quieter, as if the town itself were aware that something important was about to unfold. John McLean, the Apache heart-taker, had prepared himself for the morning. For weeks he had been observing, listening, and learning about the movements and intentions of the outsiders approaching Tombstone. He had shared what he knew with the Earp brothers and Doc Holliday, and together they had quietly planned ways to protect the town and its people. John understood that the situation could not be resolved by force alone. Patience, observation, and careful decision-making were just as vital as courage and skill. From his vantage point, on a small rise just beyond the town's edge, John could see the approach of the group that had been moving along the trails for days. They were organized, careful in their steps, and clearly aware that they were being watched. He noted the way they paused to scan the town, their gestures as they coordinated among themselves, and the way their eyes moved constantly across the landscape. Every detail was significant, and John memorized it all. He knew that awareness and timing would determine how events unfolded. Back in town, the Earps moved quietly but decisively. They ensured that doors were locked, residents were aware of the need to stay alert, and townsfolk were prepared to respond calmly to any unexpected situation. Doc Holliday, always calm under pressure, offered practical guidance, helping citizens understand what to do and where to go if a disturbance arose. The town was like a carefully arranged puzzle, with every piece positioned to maintain safety and order. John watched all of this from his vantage point, quietly proud of the coordination he had helped foster. As the morning progressed toward noon, John noticed small changes in the behavior of the approaching group. They slowed their pace slightly, glanced frequently toward the town, and appeared to be communicating silently with hand signals. John could not hear their words, but the rhythm of their movements told him that they were aware of the careful observation from the town. He signaled subtly to the Earps, who understood his meaning without a word being spoken. Every gesture, every glance, every small piece of information mattered. In Tombstone, preparation and awareness were the keys to preserving order. The townspeople, meanwhile, carried on their routines as best they could. Merchants swept their shop floors, children ran along the streets, and travelers made their way through the town. Yet beneath the surface, there was an awareness, almost instinctive, that the morning would not pass without significance. People spoke in quieter tones, paid closer attention to their surroundings, and responded quickly to small cues. John knew that the town's subtle alertness would play an important role in the hours ahead. By late morning, the group approaching Tombstone had drawn closer to the outskirts. John studied the land carefully, noting every ridge, every dip in the terrain, and every potential path the visitors might take. He understood that the environment itself could influence the outcome. A clear understanding of the landscape, combined with awareness of human behavior, could prevent mistakes and reduce risk. John's training as a scout had taught him this lesson many times before, and he applied it now with precision. As the sun climbed higher, John reflected on the importance of timing. Noon, according to the local superstition, was the moment when tensions reached their peak. While John did not believe in curses, he recognized that the shared attention on the clock could influence behavior. People unconsciously coordinated their actions with the rhythm of the day, and anticipation could magnify both caution and boldness. The convergence of natural timing, human awareness, and careful preparation made the approaching hours critical for Tombstone. The group of men slowed as they neared the main trail leading into the town. They paused, looking toward the streets, and John noted the careful, deliberate manner of their approach. He signaled to the Earps, who quietly prepared to maintain order and protect the citizens. Every action was measured, designed to minimize risk while maximizing control. John's observations allowed the town's leaders to anticipate movements and respond strategically, rather than react impulsively. In the streets, townspeople went about normal activities, but John could see subtle changes. People moved slightly more deliberately. Shopkeepers glanced up more often, and the rhythm of daily life adjusted to the quiet tension in the air. It was a delicate balance, maintaining calm while staying ready. John admired how the community had come together, each person contributing in small ways to the safety and cohesion of the town. The preparation of ordinary citizens, combined with the planning of the Earps and John himself, created a network of awareness that stretched across Tombstone. As noon approached, John focused intensely. The sun now reached its highest point, casting sharp shadows along the streets and buildings. The approaching group adjusted their pace, seemingly aware that they were being closely observed. John could see the subtle signals between their members, the cautious glances, and the small gestures indicating communication without sound. Every detail was a clue to their intentions and state of mind. In the town, the Earps moved efficiently but quietly. Virgil coordinated with merchants and citizens, Wyatt monitored the approach along the main trail, and Morgan communicated with those stationed near key locations. Doc Holliday remained alert, offering practical guidance while remaining unobtrusive. The town functioned like a living organism, with every individual contributing to the careful management of an unfolding situation. John observed this coordination with satisfaction. Every person's awareness mattered, and the preparation of weeks now reached its test. At the same time, John took stock of the town itself. Buildings, fences, and streets were positioned in ways that provided both visibility and safety. Open spaces allowed for clear lines of sight, while narrow passages encouraged careful movement. The combination of geography, human vigilance, and strategic planning created an environment in which mistakes were minimized. John had spent weeks observing, predicting, and preparing, and now all of that preparation was about to be tested. As the approaching group finally reached the outskirts of the town, John could see their hesitation. They had moved carefully, aware of both the terrain and the presence of observers. John remained calm, knowing that the next moments would require patience, clear thinking, and precise communication. He signaled subtly to the Earps, who positioned themselves along key points in the streets. Citizens were quietly guided to safe areas, minimizing risk and ensuring order. When the sun reached its peak, the quiet tension became almost tangible. Shadows fell sharply across the streets. The heat pressed down on the town, and every movement seemed magnified. John observed the approaching group carefully, noting their intentions, their coordination, and the way they scanned the surroundings. He understood that their actions were deliberate, but also influenced by the anticipation of those watching from Tombstone. Then, in a moment that combined careful timing and preparation, the situation reached its peak. John's observations, combined with the Earp's coordination, ensured that the town could respond effectively. Every person knew their role, every movement was measured, and the careful network of awareness allowed the town to maintain calm, order, and safety. It was a climax of preparation rather than confrontation, a demonstration that strategy, observation, and knowledge could guide outcomes without unnecessary conflict. By mid-afternoon, the approaching group had moved through the town's outskirts and toward the surrounding hills, having accomplished what they intended without incident. The townspeople, while relieved, had learned something important. Preparation, vigilance, and calm decision-making could shape outcomes in ways that seemed almost magical. John McLean, the Apache heart-taker, had played a crucial role in guiding the town through a potentially challenging moment, showing the power of observation, planning, and wise action. As the sun began to descend toward the horizon, the tension slowly lifted. Children played again in the streets, merchants resumed their routines, and travelers continued on their paths. Tombstone had faced a critical moment, and through preparation, cooperation, and calm leadership, it had navigated the challenge successfully. John reflected on the day, understanding that while danger and uncertainty were constant on the frontier, careful observation, awareness of human behavior, and respect for the town's community could create safety and resilience. The afternoon sun slowly sank behind the rugged mountains surrounding Tombstone, painting the desert sky in soft shades of gold and orange. A quiet calm settled over the town, a calm that felt both earned and fragile. The events of the day, tense and filled with uncertainty, had passed without any major mishap. Yet the town remained aware that life on the frontier was unpredictable, and safety was always temporary. The people of Tombstone were beginning to understand that survival in their bustling town required vigilance, careful observation, and cooperation. John McLean, the man known as the Apache heart-taker, walked slowly through the streets, observing the townsfolk as they returned to their routines. He noticed children laughing again, merchants arranging their goods, and travelers heading toward the stagecoach stops with a renewed sense of confidence. The air was still dusty, still warm from the day's sun, but there was a different feeling now, a sense that the town had faced a test and had emerged with its spirit intact. John allowed himself a quiet satisfaction. The preparation, patience, and careful observation that had guided him for weeks had paid off. Despite the outward calm, John understood that the events of the day had left an impression on everyone in Tombstone. People had seen firsthand the importance of awareness and planning. They had learned that attention to detail, quiet observation, and cooperation could prevent problems from growing into crises. These lessons were subtle but powerful, and they would shape the town's future in ways that no one could yet measure. John reflected on how far the town had come since his arrival just weeks before. Tombstone had grown in more ways than one. It had grown in confidence, resilience, and understanding. As the townspeople settled into the evening, John found a quiet spot on a small rise outside the main street, where he could watch the town from a distance. The buildings cast long shadows in the fading light, and the streets were slowly emptying as families returned to their homes. From this vantage point, he could see how the town had responded to the day's tension, how individuals had played their roles, and how the collective awareness had guided actions. It was a moment of reflection, a time to consider both what had happened and what might come in the future. John thought about the people he had met during his time in Tombstone. The Earp brothers, steadfast and reliable, had worked tirelessly to maintain order while respecting the community's needs. Doc Holliday, clever and composed, had offered insight and guidance that helped keep situations calm and controlled. Even ordinary townspeople, shopkeepers, ranchers, and travelers had played crucial roles in the day's events simply by paying attention, cooperating, and staying calm under pressure. John realized that heroism in a town like Tombstone was not always about bold gestures or dramatic acts. Sometimes it was about awareness, patience, and quiet, thoughtful action. As the sun dipped lower, John reflected on his own journey to this point. He had come to Tombstone as an observer, cautious and measured, with a lifetime of experience navigating the dangers of the frontier. He had faced many challenges in his past, from tracking through rugged landscapes to understanding the intentions of those around him. Yet, in Tombstone, he had discovered something different. Here, his skills were not just tools for survival. They were instruments for helping a community navigate the complexities of life in a bustling frontier town. The experience had deepened his understanding of people, culture, and the delicate balance of order and freedom. The quiet evening allowed John to consider the town's history as well. Tombstone had been built almost overnight, driven by the discovery of silver, and it had attracted a mix of miners, merchants, and settlers from across the country. The town's rapid growth brought both opportunity and tension, and the residents had learned to navigate the unpredictable environment with skill and resourcefulness. John appreciated the resilience of the people, the way they could face uncertainty with courage and adaptability, the way they could cooperate to maintain order, and the way they could find moments of joy even in a challenging setting. Stories about John's presence and the day's events began to spread quietly among the townsfolk. They spoke of his careful observation, his guidance, and his ability to foresee potential problems before they became crises. Some referred to him with awe, others with quiet respect, but all recognized that his contribution had been valuable. John himself did not seek recognition. He had acted out of duty, knowledge, and care for the town. Yet he understood that stories mattered. In a frontier town like Tombstone, stories preserved history, taught lessons, and shaped the way people remembered events. As evening deepened into night, the streets grew quieter, lit only by the soft glow of lanterns and the fading sunlight. John walked back to the small room he had rented above the bakery, taking in the town one last time before settling for the night. The smell of fresh bread, dust, and the distant aroma of cooking fires reminded him that life continued despite tension and uncertainty. Tombstone had survived another day, strengthened by awareness, cooperation, and the wisdom of those who had guided it carefully. John knew that the challenges of Tombstone were far from over. The town existed on the edge of the desert, close to Apache territory, and surrounded by rugged landscapes that could present new problems at any moment. Disputes between miners and ranchers, the ever-present threat of bandits, and the unpredictable nature of frontier life meant that vigilance was always necessary. Yet the town had proven that preparation, observation, and cooperation could make a meaningful difference. John's role, though now quieter, remained important as he continued to support the town in ways both seen and unseen. In the following days, Tombstone returned to a rhythm that combined both daily routines and cautious awareness. Children played with renewed energy, merchants conducted business, and travelers came and went. The town was not free from challenges, but it had learned valuable lessons about preparedness, communication, and the importance of calm action in tense situations. The story of the day when John had guided the town quietly through tension became part of the community's collective memory, passed along through conversations, letters, and reflections. John McClane eventually prepared to leave Tombstone. He had come as an observer, stayed as a guide, and now felt it was time to move on to other places where his skills might be needed. Before leaving, he walked the streets one last time, observing the town that had grown stronger in his presence. He reflected on the resilience, courage, and cooperation he had witnessed, and he felt a sense of quiet pride. Tombstone was a town capable of facing challenges and growing through them, and he had been part of that growth. As he mounted his horse and began the journey away from the town, John looked back at the wooden buildings, the bustling streets, and the mountains that framed the town. Tombstone had faced uncertainty and tension, and it had emerged with a stronger sense of community and awareness. John understood that the lessons learned here about preparation, careful observation, and cooperation would continue to guide the town in the days ahead. The people of Tombstone, strengthened by experience, would continue to navigate the challenges of frontier life with courage, skill, and resilience. In the years that followed, the story of John McClane, the Apache heart-taker, became part of the local history, not as a figure of fear, but as a man whose awareness, patience, and careful guidance had helped the town navigate a critical moment. Residents remembered the quiet heroism, the strategic thinking, and the wisdom that had shaped the town's response to tension. John's story merged with the larger history of Tombstone, a symbol of the frontier's challenges and the strength of a community prepared to face them together. As night fell and stars emerged over the desert, Tombstone rested under the vast sky. Life continued, shaped by history, human connection, and the enduring lessons of awareness and preparation. The town's legacy, strengthened by events guided quietly but wisely, became a testament to the resilience of frontier communities. And in the quiet moments, the memory of John McClane remained, a reminder that courage often comes in the form of observation, care, and thoughtful action.